What a headshot! What a head!
How's it guys, this is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'll be taking you through my final installment in the positional reviews, and it's going to be a big one. It's going to be the midfielders. So if you guys have enjoyed as we've gone through the defenders, the goalkeepers, and the forwards, and now it's time for arguably the most important position in FPL, and that's going to be those midfielder options. So as usual, if you guys are new to this video, we're basically going to be going over the numbers from last season and deciding who provides the best value in those midfielder slots. And hopefully by the end of this, you guys are getting a clearer picture on how your draft is actually going to be looking. So I do recommend going and checking out the previous positions. If you guys haven't, I'll be updating my draft in a few days' time using the information gained from this series. Make sure that you guys drop a like if you have been enjoying the videos, and make sure those notifications are turned on for the future preseason videos. But that being said, sit back, relax, and let's get straight into this one. It's a little bit sad as these are probably my favorite videos of the preseason. I love going over the stats, analyzing which options have been priced badly. So let's start off with that price per total points metric. Now you guys have probably seen, as a reminder, I would recommend watching this on probably a bigger screen than you guys are watching it right now. But don't worry, this first graph isn't an indication of what's to come, as this is super congested. I simply just want to put forward the premium options and how they kind of set in the landscape here. So all you guys need to focus on is Mo Salah, Cole Palmer, as well as Saka. So like Haaland with Salah, you're probably going to captain him if you guys do own him, so don't worry that he's below the regression line. If you guys double his points, he just provides massive value. But I just wanted to showcase here that Salah is pretty good at this game of FPL. Now in terms of Cole Palmer and Saka, you can see their points last season. I think that they all admit themselves it wasn't their best seasons, as there were a few other options that got better per 90 total points that come in a lot cheaper. But these premium assets, if you guys are going to captain them, they will be worth it. And that's just what makes Salah worth it, because his points average is so high. So you guys can say goodbye to Saka, Palmer, and Salah for the time being. I don't really think there's much of a debate there. Lots of us have our two locked-in premiums, mainly Salah and Cole Palmer. So let's remove them and kind of get a better picture of the cheaper options. Now I also want to clarify here that there's going to be certain filters on these players. I didn't select every midfielder. They had to have played 1,350 minutes or at least 15 games. An additional filter is also going to be an average of 65 minutes per appearance. So if you guys don't see one of your most popular options, that's probably the reason why they're not going to be on screen. So just a reminder, these are going to be the per 90 minute stats, and don't worry, I've included the defensive contributions as well as any positional change that these options went through. Now let's start off on the cheapest. Let's go over the left hand side first. Christie is one of the names I've seen mentioned, potentially the best value option in the game, but unfortunately he had a few injuries in the past. What I have been told though is that before his injury for Bournemouth he was on set pieces, and he also racks up those defensive contribution points. Speaking about DEFCON, you can see Anderson, arguably the most popular cheaper option amongst the engaged managers, and you guys can see why with that total points per 90 minutes. So once again, these cheaper options are really where the DEFCON contributions do lie, and that's probably where our budget midfielder slot's going to go. Now at 6.0, a massive standout is going to be Dwight McNeil. When he was fit and playing, he was obvious gold. Playing for Everton and getting these attacking numbers is quite a surprise. But like a Mud, there might be some rotation here. They are probably nailed when they are fit, but they weren't playing every single game. And unfortunately with the Mud, because of all these attacking signings, he might even be playing fullback for United. At least that's how it was for the previous United friendly. Part of a back five, he still could be creative, and I guess he comes in quite cheap. The one 6.5 I'm looking at is going to be in Dayvy. So as mentioned, I have incorporated those positional changes. So this would have been how many points he scored last season if he was a midfielder. So an extra point per goal as well as the extra clean sheet point. And because he's on penalties currently, he could be massive value for Everton. Very interesting to see though, two Everton attackers. I probably wouldn't have predicted that in terms of the midfielders, but I guess here we are. Now I won't lie, in terms of that 7.0 bracket, haven't really given too much attention to most of these assets, except for Rodgers, but I'll talk about him shortly. Otherwise, Eze also looks okay, just below the regression line at 7.5, but the real value seems to be lying in these 8.0s. So Cunha, Luis Diaz, who I'll talk about shortly, as well as Mbumo, both these two players, if they do feature for United and keep up the stats, they might be quite overlooked, but it might be a wait and see with the new squad. I mean, United definitely weren't the best team last season, so we would generally want some improvement to be shown before we commit this much of funds, but I did have Bruno Fernandes in my last draft. Now the reason I wanted to talk about Luis Diaz and actually kept him here, now I do know he went to Bayern Munich, I'm not living under a rock, but the reason I kept him up here is because Gakpo didn't make the cut on the average of 65 minutes. So I'm going to cheat a little bit here, I'm actually going to bring him into the squad, and the reason for this is I know there's a lot of preseason hype around Gakpo because he scored a hattie yesterday. Now technically it was 2 goals and 1 own goal, but he did have the ball in the back of the net 3 times, so that's gained him some attention. So bringing Gakpo up on screen, you guys can see he kept consistent with Luis Diaz in terms of points per 90 minutes, but as mentioned, he was averaging about 55 per appearance. What I wanted to actually showcase here is that whoever plays the left wing for Liverpool, I know Gakpo could also play up front, but on the left wing, he was featuring quite a bit for Liverpool. So between him and Diaz, whoever started was getting those FPL points. So could this actually be a sign that if Gakpo becomes nailed, he could actually be a great FPL asset? That's definitely the case, but it's also wait and see on who Liverpool sign. So if Isaac does make his way to Merseyside, there might be some more rotation on the left side, but at the moment if Gakpo does become secure, definitely one to watch out for. Now we spoke about this with our defenders as well as our forwards, but the per 90 stats don't always paint the nicest picture, and they can overhype some players that don't play the full game. So what the per 90 minutes always do is they kind of normalize every player to if they did feature for 90 minutes, and generally your players that play the full game, their averages are a bit lower. So to counteract this, let's now go over the total points per game, and now you can see the majority of players do kind of go down a bit, but some players actually look a lot better. On that right hand side, we can see that Bruno is now slightly closer to that regression line, actually looks like pretty okay value, but the one thing that screams out to me when I do look at this graph is United. So it seems like the United management basically just plotted this graph and then selected their signings, because Mbeumo and Cunha, the new signings, look absolute gold here. Then also factoring in a Mud at that 6.5 slot if he does become nailed and looks okay for points. Who would have thought that 3 United assets could be on the list for best midfielder? Now Savinho is also one I want to talk about, but it seems like every time there's a Man City midfielder, whether it's a Foden or a Savinho, they're putting up great points per minutes. But when we do go on to the next graph in terms of average minutes, Savinho was actually pretty nailed under Pep Guardiola. Now unfortunately most of the other players did kind of regress a little bit. Unfortunately Anderson isn't going to be the best 5.5, currently it's Norgard, but he just signed for Arsenal. McNeil's also dropped a little bit, I guess he is cheaper than Ndiaye, so that could be worth it. But now what happens is most of your players that play the full game like almost a Rodgers, they actually look a little bit better. So please just consider this when you guys are looking at your stats. The per 90 minutes are great if your player does feature for the 90, but if they don't, it's just going to inflate their numbers. Just a great indication to kind of assess the value of these options at the different price points. Let me know in the comments down below were there any surprises, and from this graph, who are you guys selecting? I mean, Caicedo could actually be a great selection. He played basically every game last season for Chelsea, and at 5.5, he could be competition for Anderson. If you guys want to pay a little bit more for some DEFCON midfielders, you can see that Declan Rice and McAllister are basically neck and neck at 6.5, also putting up some good numbers, but they're not as attacking. Now some quick graphs to just go over to reiterate the fact of kind of average minutes per game. I'm going to be going over this first insight, which is going to be the total points per 90 compared to the average minutes, just to showcase how nailed these players are. So on the right hand side, we've got Mo Salah at the top there, just as mentioned, just an incredible FPL asset, but Mbeumo wasn't too shabby at a cheaper price tag. Now Cole Palmer, Bruno Fernandes, both these two players are getting the majority of minutes, that's what you love to see. And now we mentioned Savinho, who actually when he featured, he got a lot of minutes. If he can become nailed even more, he could be a great selection, definitely one to keep the eye on, but Man City rotation is always going to be there. Now this is going to be super important if you guys are looking for some DEFCON midfielders. What you want to see here is that your player does feature for the full 90, someone like a Declan Rice or an Enzo who are getting around that 82 mark. Tielemans is another one that's been mentioned, quite popular amongst the analytic team. And then speaking about Caicedo, basically every game for Chelsea last season. Now the one player I also want to touch on is going to be slightly more to that 75-minute mark, almost in the middle, and that's going to be Anderson. And that's why there might be some concern about him, is that he wasn't playing every game every season. Now I think he did win that spot as the season went on, and that's why his minutes as a sub-on could have affected him, but it's something to keep in mind. Now I'm going to switch this up and go to the per game averages once again. Now quickly I just want to touch on Mo Salah. There's even more separation between him and the rest of the pack, but I'm going to remove him as it's getting a little bit cluttered. So once removing Salah, we do have a bit more insight into how the rest of the team is kind of split. And once again, these are your per game averages, so slightly more realistic. Once again, as expected from the previous graphs, Mbeumo Cunha looked pretty good, but now Cole Palmer also providing some good value. And that top kind of crowd is really separating from the rest of the players. You guys can see on the left hand side in red is going to be Saka. Just a reminder, the colors are price dependent. Premiums in red, mid-ranges in orange, and budgets in green. So unfortunately, Saka with those injuries was being subbed off a bit early or being subbed on late into the fixtures, and that's dropped his average minutes by quite a bit. But this graph is simply just to show you guys that you should be targeting players that get the majority of minutes, and that's why I think Rodgers is quite popular at that 7.0 price tag. Now we have spoken about the more general numbers, your total points, that sort of thing. Now let's dive in a bit more into the specifics. Now the first section is going to be one that's been spoken about continuously in the preseason, and that's defensive contributions. So let's bring up which defenders that you guys should be targeting. Now I've put actually a cap on this. Unfortunately, players like Salah, they don't get many defensive contributions, so I've put an average here of 6 defensive contributions per game. As if you're getting below that, let's be honest, you're probably not getting many bonus points for DEFCONs. Now one thing I also want to point out here is this is defensive contributions per 90 versus defensive contributions per game, and the dotted line that you guys see is a straight line along the same numbers. So basically what this is going to tell you is just look at a player, take their horizontal distance and their vertical distance, and that's going to depend on if this player played a full 90 or not. So if your player does feature basically on the line, for example like a Caicedo, that means that their per game and per 90 averages are basically exactly the same, versus someone like an Anderson or a Christie, whose per 90 numbers are a little bit higher than their per game numbers. So when you guys do look at this, I want you to focus on the y-axis or the vertical axis, because this is the actual per game averages that these players did have. What this tells us is that there were only 2 players that had a plus 12, which remember you guys need 12 defensive contributions for those extra 2 bonus points. Caicedo and Norgard were the only 2 players that averaged that. Now that doesn't mean these other players aren't great, because it might just mean there are some games where they don't reach that average, which could have been the same for Caicedo and Norgard, to be honest, but for graphical sake, let's just say that. So while Anderson and Christie do provide good value, it's just important to make sure that these players are nailed, that they're going to play the majority of games, which they should, but could be a potential why they might not be great. I've seen a lot of people kind of quoting the per 90 averages, but the fact of the matter is that Anderson wasn't getting that every single game, and that could make someone like a Caicedo better value. There are a few other players up there if you guys want to look, but I think the ones I've mentioned are probably the ones that are the most popular. Now let's take a look at some of the others. Now the ones you want to watch out for are your more inverted commas attacking players that do possess a bit of defensive contribution threat. So my favorite option at the moment is going to be your first orange that you guys see there, and that's going to be Bruno Fernandes, averaging just below 10 defensive contributions per game. So this does mean that Bruno would have racked up some defensive contributions in a few games, and combining that with some attacking threat, that's why he might actually be worth his price tag. Now we've also spoken about McAllister. It was actually my latest draft. I think him versus Rice is a debate that you guys could be having. Rice looking slightly better for those averages. Another player to mention is obviously in Dayvy as well. At 6.5, he might not be getting defensive contributions every single game, but the attacking threat and the penalties could also make him good value. You also have a player like an Mbeumo, and that's the reason why he did reflect so nicely in the previous total points graphs. Even Cunha was getting a few kind of defensive threats, but those are probably pretty minimal. I mean, as you go down this list, the chance of getting those extra 2 points is going to be less, but that's as expected for some of these more attacking players. So once again, the y-axis here, the horizontal axis, does tell you the actual numbers or the actual averages, but if some players can improve their average game time, they could rack up these defensive contributions quite nicely. Now we've spoken about the defensive contributions, let's go old school back to the attacking numbers, as that's probably the most exciting part about FPL. So on graph here, we're going to go back to the per 90 numbers. You guys know which players are nailed and not. Don't worry, for the most important stats, I'll be going back to the per game averages, but let's go over expected goals non-penalty and expected assists. Now, you guys know me by now, I always go over the non-penalty variant. I just find penalties are quite hard to kind of predict. But if you are comparing player A to player B, and they look exactly the same, obviously go for the one on penalties. So once again, shout out to Luis Diaz putting up some good numbers. Cody Gakpo would have been similar here, but he did get more defensive contributions. Otherwise, Salah's the main goal threat, and Saka's the main assisting threat. Cole Palmer meets somewhere in the middle there, and if you guys do add penalties, him and Salah just shine even brighter, and that would have also improved Saka's XG. Now, the one player that really shines for me here is going to be Ismaila Sarr. You guys see him, he's the most kind of out there green at the moment, with goal threat plus assisting threat. I would probably say in terms of attackers, he's my favorite out and out 6.5, and when you guys compare him to someone like an Dayvy, Sarr's numbers kind of dwarf him. McNeil also main attacking threat, and then Bruno Fernandes there, more of an assister than a scorer, and it'll be interesting to see how that changes with these new signings for United. Now, Eze also looking pretty strong there. If he can add penalties to his arsenal, it makes him a great option, and maybe that's going to be worth the extra bit over someone like a Sarr. Also do like Cunha, but if you guys have seen him last season, you guys know he overperformed this XG by quite a far margin, just scored banger after banger. These attacking numbers are quite useful, but now let's go on and actually compare the all-in-out duel defensive contributions versus attacking threat. Let's see who actually wins. So these last two graphs are going to be probably the most important of the video. They're going to give you that perfect blend of attacking threat and defensive threat to help you guys secure who's going to be your starting lineup in the midfield department. So on the bottom here, we do have non-penalty XG involvement. That's non-penalty XG plus expected assists, and then comparing them to defensive contributions, both stats per 90 minutes. So on the bottom right hand side, we do have our attackers who don't tend to do a lot of defending as expected, and on the top left hand side, we have our CDMs, and that's vice versa. Now, the reason I do like Bruno Fernandes is he does offer us some blend of both kind of worlds, and that's where you guys have to decide where you want to go, somewhere in the middle or bottom right or top left. Now, because your attacking threat, for example an assist or a goal, is worth more in FPL, your more expensive players will be on the bottom right hand side, but that doesn't mean your top left can't be worth their value with those defcons. It's just kind of finding the best blend of the two or the one with the budget, and that's why Sarr and Bruno Fernandes really stand out to me, as it's almost the best of both worlds from a budget point of view and both these numbers. Now, unfortunately, there are going to be some question marks about some of these other options. For example, Cunha and Mbumo, how's their form going to translate to that United team, as well as what's Ahmad's position going to be. Now, the last talking point I want to talk about is going to be Saka, because as you guys can see, you're probably thinking that he looks like incredible value keeping alongside Mo Salah with a splash of more defensive contributions. Now, what I will add to this is that you guys saw Saka's assisting numbers, and because he wasn't averaging 90 minutes, they are pretty inflated. So let's see what happens when we do switch this up to the more realistic options, and as you guys can see now, Saka does drop behind. Mo Salah is once again the king, Palmer in second, and this does kind of bring out the differentiation with someone like a Bruno Fernandes and an Mbumo. Sarr's also regressed slightly. Him and Eze are contesting for that Crystal Palace midfielder slot, and now this makes Enzo look like a little bit more of an attractive option. I know when we are discussing which CDM to go for, McAllister, Rice, could it actually be Enzo? I just really love this graph to make those decisions. Now, once again on the top left hand side, we've seen Anderson regress slightly in terms of those defensive contributions. His attacking threat though is slightly higher than Caicedo, and he should be on set pieces, so that could outweigh that defensive average. I won't lie, I wish Ndai's numbers were slightly higher, but I guess when you do add penalties, his XG would have improved, so it could be a nice blend of both these two stats. But I just really love this graph for that decision making. It just plots things out so nicely. You got your defensive contribution players versus your attacking options, and the majority of them are exactly where you thought they'd be. It's just kind of picking out which player you think is a little bit of an outlier, someone like a Bruno, an Mbumo, or a Sarr. You guys let me know in the comments down below, what's your current midfielder starting lineup? Now, this is going to end our positional review series. This one was a great one to end on. I absolutely loved going through these numbers. Don't worry, I'll be posting it to Twitter shortly so that you guys can delve into it a little bit deeper and at your own pace. Make sure that you guys are subscribed and those notifications are turned on for my future draft videos. I should be dropping one in probably the next day or two. If you guys have any questions about any of the positions, comment them down below or join my Discord server, link in the description. Really happy to chat to you guys about any stats. But this is basically our video, guys. Hope you guys did enjoy it. Please don't like, subscribe if you have subscribed yet. Tons of content thought to come up. So as mentioned, make sure those notifications are turned on. But for the time being, I'm signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers, bye.